Around Keanu's house, surrounded by sturdy trees, while the muffled sound of punches resonates inside. Sunlight streams through the glass windows, illuminating the minimalist space. Keanu stands in the center of the room, training with precise movements on a punching bag. In the corner, Shadow, a German shepherd with a shiny coat, watches intently, his ears perked and eyes fixed. He doesn't miss a single move. When Keanu crouches to stretch, Shadow tries to mimic him, stretching exaggeratedly. The scene creates a light and human moment. Keanu kneels to pet Shadow. Their eyes meet and there is a silent connection, something deeper than just friendship. "You understand me, don't you? I bet you've been through things I can't even imagine." Shadow's gaze makes Keanu remember the first time they met. He pauses for a moment, lost in thought, and the sound of distant barks from the shelter fills his memory. In a simple shelter filled with barks and chaotic energy, Keanu walks slowly down the corridors, his footsteps echoing on the cold floor as he carefully observes each animal. He stops in front of a modest cage in the corner. Inside, Shadow sits motionless, his eyes fixed on the ground. He doesn't bark or look at Keanu right away. There's something different about him, an invisible weight, a story he seems to silently carry. A shelter employee approaches, holding a clipboard. He watches Keanu for a moment before speaking. "This is Shadow. He was brought here after his owner? Well, he was a police officer. He passed away in the line of duty." Shadow was left alone. Keanu lifts his eyes to the dog, now intrigued. He kneels, lowering himself to Shadow's level, and observes the dog's eyes, a mix of intensity and vulnerability. Keanu calmly extends his hand, not rushing. Shadow, hesitant at first, slowly moves forward, pressing his nose against Keanu's palm. "I know what it feels like to start over too. Let's face this together, partner?" The dog almost imperceptibly wags his tail, enough to make Keanu smile. He stands determined. "Are you sure? He's a bit intense. He might be hard to handle. I think he just needs someone to trust. And to be honest, I think I do too." Keanu is back in the present, walking into the kitchen while absent-mindedly scrolling through his phone. The environment is peaceful, with the soft sound of keys being pressed filling the space. However, the silence is broken by a faint but distinct sound, a click. Keanu raises his eyes, curious, and turns to see Shadow with his paw and muzzle pressed against the door of a room. The dog, with surprising skill, has just opened the door almost human-like. Keanu lets out a low, incredulous laugh as he places his phone on the kitchen counter, still in disbelief over what he just saw. "Wait, how do you do that? Training to steal my job, huh?" Shadow, unhurried, calmly sits down and tilts his head, giving Keanu a look that's almost challenging, as if he truly understands the joke. Keanu's laugh mixes with a sense of admiration and surprise. In a bustling market in downtown Los Angeles, Keanu strolls through the aisles calmly, with Shadow by his side. The German shepherd maintains perfect posture, walking in sync with his owner, but his eyes and ears are attuned to every strange sound, as if he perceives something no one else notices. Across the store, two men watch the scene. Diego, tall with a hard expression, nudges Marco, his younger and more hesitant partner. Marco looks uneasy, but Diego keeps his gaze fixed on Keanu. Diego comments quietly, a subtle smile on his lips as he watches Keanu. "That's Reeves. The guy's a walking gold mine." Marco, still with a wary expression, looks at Shadow with caution and asks, "And what about that dog? He doesn't seem normal." Diego shrugs and laughs dismissively, "Just a big dog. Nothing we can't handle." Despite Diego's response, Marco remains uneasy, but Diego's gaze never leaves Keanu. Shadow, on the other hand, subtly turns his head, focusing his attention on the two men, as if sensing that something isn't quite right. Keanu picks a few items from the shelves and heads to the checkout, unaware of the attention he's attracting. Meanwhile, Shadow begins to act differently. His ears perk up, his eyes lock on a distant point, and he lets out a low growl. Keanu stops for a moment, furrowing his brow, and places a hand on Shadow's head, trying to calm him. "It's okay, buddy. We're just getting some bread," Keanu says softly, looking around but seeing nothing out of the ordinary. He crouches down and looks directly into Shadow's eyes, as if already understanding what the dog is trying to warn him about. "You're always one step ahead, aren't you? Let's head home," Keanu says with a smile, then begins walking toward the exit. Meanwhile, Diego and Marco, already formulating a plan, exchange a knowing glance. Diego, with a mischievous grin, says quietly, "Let's follow him home. It'll be easy. He hasn't even noticed us." As night falls, Keanu sits in his living room, reviewing scripts while Shadow rests calmly at his feet. The house is quiet except for the soft sound of pages turning. Suddenly, Shadow lifts his head, his senses alert. He slowly rises and walks over to the window. Outside, a shadow moves faintly. Noticing the dog's unusual behavior, Keanu approaches him. He looks out the window but sees only the wind rustling the trees in the darkness. Keanu shakes his head slightly, watching the attentive dog. "You're more vigilant than I am, partner. But it seems calm out there," he thinks softly, stepping away from the window. However, Shadow doesn't move. He remains still, his eyes locked on the darkness outside, as if sensing something Keanu cannot yet see. In the middle of the night, the camera shows the house in complete silence, bathed in the silvery light of the moon. Shadow, lying in the living room, suddenly perks up, catching a faint sound from outside. He slowly rises and walks toward the back door. Outside, Diego and Marco crouch by the fence. Diego gestures to Marco, signaling the best point to enter. Diego is impatient as he motions for Marco to follow his lead. "It's just a dog, Marco. Are you afraid of a dog? Just do what I'm telling you." Marco hesitates, but Diego ignores him, focusing on the task at hand. Inside, Shadow begins to growl softly, his eyes fixed on the door. Keanu remains asleep, unaware of the situation unfolding. Shadow doesn't bark, he patrols the house in silence, his movements methodical and precise. Diego attempts to open the fence gate but suddenly hears the faint click of an interior door being unlocked. He freezes, exchanging a tense glance with Marco. Confused, Diego mutters, "What? Did he leave the dog inside the house?" Marco whispers something in response, but before they can react, Shadow appears in the side window, his silhouette outlined by the moon. His eyes gleam in the darkness as he lets out a deep growl. Marco, visibly unsettled, exclaims, "I told you. That dog is not normal." Diego, unfazed, mutters, "Doesn't matter. Not now. We'll come back when he's not paying attention." The two men retreat into the bushes, watching the house from a distance. Shadow, calm but vigilant, tracks their every movement with his unblinking gaze, as though waiting for the next step. The next night, the thieves return, this time more prepared. Armed with tools to cut through the fence, they cut the power to the house, plunging everything into total darkness. Inside, Keanu wakes to the sound of metal scraping against metal. Reaching for his phone, he checks the security cameras only to find the screens are all black. Shadow is already in attack mode, growling more aggressively than before. Keanu, whispering to himself, mutters, "All right, now I'm starting to think you were right." Grabbing a flashlight, Keanu begins to move through the house, trying to calm Shadow. "It's okay, Shadow. We'll handle this together." The thieves finally manage to force their way in through the back door. The sound of the door creaking open echoes through the house, and Shadow immediately rushes toward the noise, ready for the confrontation. Diego and Marco cautiously enter the house, their elongated shadows cast by the beam of light from their flashlights. Diego's voice breaks the silence as he calls out, taunting Keanu. "Reeves, we know you're in there. Make it easier on yourself and your useless dog." Keanu, on the other side of the room, remains calm, trying to buy some time while formulating a plan. "Are you sure about this? It doesn't have to end like this. You can still walk out that door without anyone getting hurt." Diego laughs menacingly, but Marco seems increasingly nervous, his unease palpable in the air. Shadow, hidden in the shadows of the room, watches them closely, calculating their every move. Suddenly, one of the thieves steps too close to the kitchen, and Shadow reacts swiftly, leaping out of the darkness with a fierce bark that reverberates through the house. The sound is deafening. Marco drops his flashlight in a panic, and the tension in the room escalates. Marco yells in fear, his voice trembling, "I told you. That dog is not normal." Diego snaps back with irritation, "Shut up and grab him." Shadow vanishes back into the shadows, his footsteps echoing in the silence, leaving the thieves even more on edge, unsure of where the next move would come from. The house is plunged into an eerie silence, broken only by the nervous breaths of the intruders. Marco clutches the flashlight, trembling, trying to illuminate the room as Diego quietly issues orders to him. Diego tells Marco to stay focused, brushing off the threat. "Stay steady. It's just a dog, damn it." Suddenly, from the darkness, Shadow emerges, leaping with precision and knocking Marco to the ground. With incredible strength, he pins Marco down with his front paws and clamps onto the sleeve of Marco's jacket with his teeth. Diego reacts in shock, shouting out, "What the hell is this?" He rushes forward with a tool in hand, aiming at Shadow, but the dog meets his gaze with a fierce stare and growls menacingly. Diego hesitates, momentarily taken aback by the intensity of Shadow's threat. Marco, trapped beneath the dog, screams in panic, "Get him off me! Diego, for God's sake!" From a shadowed corner, Keanu watches the scene unfold. He realizes Shadow isn't just attacking. He's controlling every move with an almost methodical precision. Inspired by Shadow's courage, Keanu grabs a nearby wooden plank and steps forward to disarm Diego, who is trying to recover from the chaos. With a swift and calculated strike, Keanu knocks the tool from Diego's hands. Keanu says with a calm but firm voice, "You broke into the wrong house." Diego stumbles backward, his expression shifting from rage to fear as he sees Shadow advancing toward him again, eyes locked on him with unyielding focus. Keanu, still trying to protect Shadow, calls out to him, "Shadow, stop. I've got this." But Shadow remains steadfast, guarding Keanu with an eerie calm. Just as Diego tries to make a run for it, Shadow leaps again, tackling him with a precise bite to the leg, enough to immobilize him without causing any permanent harm. Keanu watches in disbelief, slowly realizing that something isn't quite right about Shadow's behavior. Keanu whispers under his breath, "This isn't normal. You know exactly what you're doing?" After tying up Diego with a length of rope, Keanu calls the police. While waiting, he kneels beside Shadow, who's now sitting calmly, ever watchful. Keanu says with a sense of awe, "I knew you were special, but this is something else." As the distant sound of sirens grows louder, the flashing red and blue lights illuminate the house. Two police officers quickly enter, cuffing Diego and Marco, still in shock. One of the officers notices Shadow and stops in his tracks, recognizing him. The officer says with disbelief, "Wait, is that Shadow?" Keanu frowns, confused by the question. The officer nods, still astonished. He was the top K9 in the unit before he retired. "I can't believe he's here." Keanu looks at Shadow, who now stands calmly by his side, wagging his tail gently. Keanu softly mutters, "So that's it? You've always been a hero." Shadow merely tilts his head, as if acknowledging what Keanu has just figured out. The thieves are taken away by the police, while Keanu and Shadow remain outside, watching as the police cars drive off into the night. The house falls back into silence, but this time it carries a sense of safety. Keanu sits on the couch with Shadow beside him, pouring himself a glass of wine. Keanu smiles at his loyal companion, "You deserve the Oscar more than I do, partner." The camera pulls back slowly as Keanu and Shadow relax together, the setting sun in the background. The scene ends with a sense of peace and gratitude, as the screen fades to black and the words appear. Loyalty doesn't need